Welcome to Other Words, the UCLA Tarjan Center Plain Language podcast, where we interview our speakers from the Distinguished Lecture Series. I am Kecia Weller, Senior Disability Rights Advocate at the UCLA Tarjan Center. I'll be your host for this episode. For more information, please visit our website, tarjancenter.org. It is spelled Tarjan center.org. I want to welcome Dr. Nicole Rosen. Dr. Rosen is a postdoctoral fellow at the UCLA Semel Institute. She received a postdoctoral fellowship through the Autism Science Foundation to lead the Next Generation Siblings project. It's also called Next Gen Sib. Dr. Rosen earned her doctorate at UCLA. During her training, she led research studies about siblings, helped provide evaluations and support services for autistic and other neurodiverse children, teens, and adults, and helped develop new tools to better understand autism. Her research focuses on the relationship between autistic people and their siblings. She studies how they support each other and how their relationship changes as they grow in age. Before we start, thank you so much, Dr. Rosen, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is so nice to have you. First question. Why is it important to understand sibling relationships in autism? Why are siblings so important to autistic individuals?
I love that question to start. I think the answer to that question is probably twofold. So we know siblings are incredibly important because they are on their own, because they're people outside of the autistic individuals who deserve to have their needs met and to be seen. We also know that siblings are often labeled, if they don't have autism, as the kind of quote unquote unaffected sibling when they don't have autism. But that's actually probably a misnomer because there's really no such thing as an unaffected sibling in autism. Just the reality of living with somebody with autism, they're significantly influenced and kind of affected by living with autism. So we know that effect is present, for example, in early childhood as the siblings grow up together, as they age into adolescence and then adulthood as some of the siblings think about having children of their own, and then potentially later on as the siblings think about potentially taking on caregiving roles for their autistic siblings. So important in their own right because they deserve to be talked about and supported, but also kind of the second part of your question about why siblings are so important to autistic individuals. I think that really points us to understanding how siblings have kind of one of the most important relationships because it's lifelong duration. It has kind of frequent contact and support. Unlike friends where you have to kind of meet these people and start to develop and maintain that friendship, siblings are almost these built-in partners and companions. And so it makes it really helpful in autism because we know making and keeping friends can sometimes be challenging. And so when you have that built-in teacher, mentor, friend as a sibling, it really does seem to be a helpful kind of partner as you navigate the different parts of life.
I really appreciate that answer, Dr. Rosen. Our next question is, what are siblings constellation factors?
Another great question. So talked about this in the talk, and it's kind of a fancy term that doesn't need to be so fancy. And it just really describes your position in the family or characteristics of you that can kind of shape the role that you have in the family. So when we talk about sibling constellation factors and in my research, I'm often talking about things like your birth order position or sex assigned at birth or your age in relation to your other siblings. So whether you're the youngest, middle, oldest, whether there's a dyad kind of sex match. So whether you and your sibling share the same sex or different sex and other things like that.
Thank you so much for explaining what constellation is.
Of course.
What happens when siblings reach adulthood?
When siblings reach adulthood, all siblings, of course, are different. But what we know in the literature and from our research studies are that siblings of autistic people, they reach adulthood and their interests and needs tend to change. And just like kind of people without siblings on the spectrum. And so they're potentially in a way that's a little bit different than siblings of non-autistic people. They are maybe no longer just focused on the potential of everyday life events like work, their personal life, potentially bringing children to their own families, having children of their own, but they're also potentially exploring the idea of taking on caregiving roles for their autistic sibling as they age. And so that's kind of what makes siblings of autistic people in adulthood a little bit different, is there's that extra potential thought that sometimes comes into question. And that might look like the autistic sibling coming to live with the non-autistic sibling. It might look like the non-autistic sibling taking on more of the legal and financial support that maybe the autistic sibling's parents were previously doing, providing them with housing, and just different support options. So ultimately their needs and priorities change. And we think about it like the future family planning decisions seem to come to the forefront as they reach adulthood.
Thank you so much. What is the Next Gen Sibs project?
So the Next Gen Sibs project is a multi-site research study exploring kind of how autism traits run in families. It's a multi-site study, as I mentioned, and the visits are completed either virtually or in person. And we have 8 different sites who are actively participating in the study. So that includes UCLA, UC Davis, Emory University, Birkbeck, University of London, University of Alberta in Canada, University of Miami, Washington University in St. Louis, and Yale University. I believe that's 8. And we are looking for infants who are ideally 12 months or younger. And we have some flexibility-ish, 12 to 18 months, but we're hoping for 12 months or younger at the time of their initial enrollment, who have at least one biological aunt or uncle with autism. So how that kind of relates to the sibling, if you are a sibling of an autistic person and you have a child of your own, that child would be eligible if they're under our kind of 12-month time frame. And so when we have an infant who's eligible, we are developmentally kind of monitoring these infants through developmental assessments from ages 6 months through 36 months at these 6-month intervals. And at each 6-month interval, we're doing these kind of comprehensive assessments. They can look very different depending on the age, of course. But after the visits, we provide feedback, summaries of skills, assessment reports if that's needed, referrals for services if that's needed. If a child does have autism, then we will go ahead and do the full assessment and provide that diagnostic write-up so that the family can access services. And so it's this kind of longitudinal type study where we are really actively enrolling those infants and looking to learn, what do those infants look like? And for the ones who end up going on to receive a diagnosis of autism, did we notice anything at those earlier ages? And also kind of what can we do to support these siblings as they navigate this next chapter?
Thank you so much for explaining that so clearly. My next question for you is, what did this research teach you?
I like that question. So before the Next Gen Sibs project kind of became what it is right now, we did a series of focus groups with siblings of autistic people to first look at, is this something that you guys really want? And is this something that as researchers and clinicians that we should be investing our time and funding into kind of providing for you? What would make your life better? And so through a series of focus groups across two different sites, us and at UCLA and Emory, we were able to collect some feedback on what these siblings actually want. So we learned about what their sibling relationships were like, what they were thinking about as they made these family planning decisions. What is their willingness and kind of interest in participating in future research? What kind of research would they like? Those kinds of questions. And a big takeaway, among many other things, we learned so much from just listening to these siblings. But one of the big takeaways was they want support, that they're their own people, of course, separate from their autistic siblings, but that they also need support too, and their needs need to be met as well. And there's a lot of anxiety and uncertainty that comes with bringing children into the world, and especially when you have autism in the family and just wanting to know more information in what seems like a really scary, you can deep dive online and find a ton of misinformation. And so just have incredible sources that can be kind of your outlet to really learn the key information and feel equipped to kind of handle this next stage.
It sounds like the research taught you a lot, Dr.
Yes.
Rosen.
And we're hoping that the next phase, once we actually have the data from all of our sites and we have enough data, we are eager to share what we're learning from actually seeing these families now.
Sounds great.
Yes.
What advice can you give to sibling caregivers?
To sibling caregivers, my advice would probably, I'll steal it from what the siblings kind of had mentioned during our focus groups. They really talked about just being open about your own needs, not being afraid to ask for help, not being afraid to not know the answers to things, asking the questions and not kind of, and being part of those conversations rather than kind of waiting for an answer to come to us. Learning different strategies to connect with your autistic sibling. And we know that that can look very different for different sibling dyads. And then also kind of being prepared. So, or a big takeaway was that siblings didn't know how to, for example, transfer guardianship or navigate Social Security or access funds and trusts and wills or how to secure housing options for their siblings with different support needs. And those resources are out there, but they're not as readily accessible as we would like. And so that's kind of a goal of ours to also help to disseminate that information more. But I think my advice would be to start those things early, because the last thing we want is for kind of crisis time to come. And that's when we start putting these pieces together. It's much easier, and we've heard this feedback time and time again from siblings, that when these things are put into place beforehand, it makes for a much easier transition, should that be kind of part of what the sibling wants to do.
Great answer. Our last question. What are the next steps individuals may take if they are interested in learning more?
Yes, so if anybody's interested in learning more about our Next Gen Sibs project, I would encourage you, we have our own website. It's nextgensibs.org. So nextgensibs.org. You can also email at info@nextgensibs.org, and that will go directly to me, and I can kind of set you up. We'll do a mini screening, and then I will essentially be assigning you to get started, and we can start scheduling. So just reach out to me.
Thank you. That is very insightful. Thank you, Dr. Rosen. You taught us about the relationship between autistic individuals and their siblings. It's very important. Thanks again, and we'll all see you next time.